There are moments that divide your life into before and after. For me, that moment came this morning at exactly 8:12 a.m. when I rinsed out my coffee cup like I've done every single morning for years. I always drink from the same mug, a faded ceramic one with a chipped rim and a quote on the side that says, "Start where you are." I don't even like the quote anymore. It reminds me of all the places I never got to go, all the chances I passed up. But for some reason, I keep using it. Maybe out of habit. Maybe because it was the last mug my father ever gave me. I was halfway through washing it when I heard a soft metallic clink. From inside, I paused. Thought maybe it was just the spoon. But when I tilted the cup and looked closer, something shiny caught the light. I frowned and turned the mug upside down. A tiny rusted key dropped into my palm. It was taped to a piece of clear plastic film, the kind used to seal medicine packets or tiny electronics. My heart skipped. Beneath the tape was a folded piece of paper, aged and thin, like it had been waiting there for years. I peeled it open with shaking fingers. The writing on it made my breath catch in my throat. "Open it before 6 p.m. That was all it said. But the handwriting, I recognized it instantly. Slanted slightly to the right. The P in open looped in that familiar, overly dramatic curve. It was my father's handwriting. The same father who walked out the front door 13 years ago said he was heading to the gym like always and never came home. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't drop the key. I just stared at it, like my body had gone completely still. But my heart was racing, like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. Because this wasn't some vague coincidence. This wasn't a prank. I had cleaned that mug inside and out for over a decade. There was no way this had just appeared there, unless someone placed it recently. And that someone had to know I never gave up. That every single year on July 19th, I lit a candle in the window for my father, even when everyone else told me to move on. That I still had his old gym membership card tucked in a box under my bed, that I kept asking questions, kept visiting dead ends, kept hoping. And now a key. A locker key, judging by the shape. Worn down, tagged faintly with the number 212 in black marker. The metal teeth were dulled, like it had been used 1,000 times. My fingers traced the edges of it as memories rushed back. My father's gym bag slung over his shoulder, his laugh echoing in the kitchen. The way he'd ruffle my hair and say, "Back in an hour, Karina want eggs or pancakes." Today I had been 34 when he disappeared. Not a child, but I was still his girl. He never missed a day at the gym. Never missed a Sunday breakfast, never left without a hug. And then on July 19th, 2012, he vanished. The gym said he never arrived. The police found no signs of foul play, just silence. And that silence became a wall between me and the world. Until today, the note said, "Open it before 6 p.m. That wasn't just a message, it was a deadline. And I had no idea what would happen if I missed it. What was I supposed to do? Sit here and overthink it? Call someone who... The police, I already tried that 13 years ago. I looked at the clock, 8:16 a.m. I still had time. But one thing was crystal clear. This key wasn't just about a locker. It was about a truth that had been buried for over a decade, and someone wanted me to find it now. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. I took one last look at the key in my palm. My breath slowed. My body moved on instinct. I grabbed my coat, slipped the key into my pocket, locked the door behind me. Because if my father left this message, if he planted it after all these years, then it meant one thing. He never left by accident. And whatever he needed me to find inside, locker 212. It was finally time to open it. Before everything changed, before the mug, the key, the silence. There was a time when life was ordinary in the best way. We lived in a modest brick house in a sleepy part of Asheville, North Carolina. My father, Denny Rowe, wasn't wealthy, but he was everything solid in this world. He'd been a mechanic most of his life, the kind of man who always had grease under his fingernails and knew how to fix just about anything except a broken heart. Maybe I was his only child. My mother, Isla, passed away when I was 6, after a sudden illness, and from that moment on it was just me and Dad. But it never felt like anything was missing. He filled every room with his quiet care, his stubborn routines, and his deep, calming presence. People used to say, "Karina, your dad doesn't talk much." But when he does, he means every word. And they were right. He didn't say "I love you" every day, but he made me scrambled eggs with cheese cut in the shape of hearts every Sunday until I moved out. I wasn't some lost little girl when he disappeared. I was 34. I had my own life, my own apartment, a teaching job I'd worked hard for. But I still called him every morning at 7:15 before he went to the gym just to say, "Morning, Pop. You good?" And every single time he'd say the same thing, "I'm good, baby," eggs or pancakes. Sunday, we had a rhythm. He'd go to the gym at 6, work out for an hour, then stop at Grady's Diner and pick up breakfast. I'd meet him at his place around 8:30. He'd sit across from me sipping black coffee and listening as I ranted about students' deadlines and how I couldn't keep a plan alive if my life depended on it, and he always listened fully. The kind of listening that made you feel like you mattered. It wasn't just the food or the routine. It was the feeling of being tethered to someone who'd seen all your worst moments and never turned away. My dad never missed a recital, a graduation, or even a dentist appointment if I asked him to come. He was quiet, but he showed up. That's the part. No one understands when they say things like, "Maybe he left on purpose." You don't just leave a life you built brick by brick. You don't leave your daughter behind without a trace. Not if you were Denny Rowe. I remember our last Sunday breakfast like it was sealed in glass. He wore his old gym sweatshirt, the one with the torn sleeve, and he had this faraway look in his eyes, like he was remembering something from long ago. I asked him what was on his mind. He smiled faintly and said, "Just thinking about some old junk I need to clear out." I teased him about finally cleaning the garage. He chuckled, said nothing, and took a long sip of coffee. It wasn't strange at the time, just a quiet moment. But now, I think that was the beginning of his goodbye. Back then, I didn't notice any cracks. No shady phone calls, no sudden deaths or threats, nothing that would make me suspect he was in danger. He was careful with his life, careful with mine, and he loved being my dad. He'd say it all the time in his own way, "Don't forget your coat. Karina, it's cold out." That meant he loved me. "Fill your gas tank before it hits empty." That meant he was scared I'd ever be stranded. That's what made the disappearance so unbearable, not just the loss, but the confusion. People don't just disappear, not people like him. So for years, I tortured myself thinking, maybe I missed something. Maybe there was a sign, a note, a warning, but there was nothing. The police said he had no enemies, no known medical conditions, no signs of foul play. Just an empty gym bag left behind at home and a last recorded location that led nowhere. At first, friends brought casseroles, neighbors left flowers. People hugged me a little tighter when they saw me in line at the grocery store. But time passed. They moved on, I didn't. Every July 19th, I sat on the porch of my father's empty house with a single candle and a plate of pancakes. It sounds ridiculous, I know. But it was the one way I could still talk to him. Eggs or pancakes. "Pop," I'd whisper. "Still pancakes. Right? I never stopped waiting. Not really. Even when I sold the house. Even when I quit teaching because I couldn't walk into a classroom and pretend I was okay anymore, I carried him with me. In every routine, every cup of coffee, every Sunday that passed with silence. That's the tragedy of grief. People don't talk about it doesn't always howl. Sometimes it just sits with you, quiet and heavy like a coat you forgot you were wearing. So yes, before he vanished, life was simple, safe, predictable. Filled with routines and Sunday breakfasts, I lived in the kind of life people might call small, but when it was gone, it left a hole the size of the sky. And now, 13 years later, Someone somehow has just lit a match in the middle of that hole. A key. A note. A deadline. I don't know what. I'll find when I open that locker. I don't know if I'll find answers or more questions. But I know this much. If my father really did leave something behind for me to find today, then my old life, that quiet, solid life I once had, was never the full story. And the rest of that story is waiting. Somewhere behind. Locker 212. The first red flag was small, almost forgettable. The kind of moment you don't even notice until much later when you're playing everything back trying to spot the thing that didn't make sense. It was July 19th, 2012, a Thursday. Dad had stayed over at my place the night before because his water heater had gone out. Something about a rusted valve he couldn't fix that evening. I was secretly thrilled I hadn't had a reason to cook for someone in months. He slept on my couch, like always, with one of my grandma's old quilts pulled up to his chin and a paperback mystery novel resting on his chest. I remember he didn't even use a pillow, just folded up his gym bag and said, "This old back needs punishment to stay straight." That morning, I woke up to the sound of his keys jangling. I came out of my bedroom to see him dressed and ready. He wore his gray sweatpants and the same blue hoodie he always took to the gym, but something was off. He looked distracted. His eyes were scanning the kitchen like he was trying to remember something. His hand hovered near the coffee pot but didn't pour. He was gripping the counter too tightly. "Morning, Pop," I said, rubbing sleep out of my eyes. He jumped, not dramatically, just a slight flinch, like he hadn't realized I was standing there. Then he smiled quickly and said, "Didn't mean to wake you, just heading out without coffee." I teased, "You okay?" He chuckled and waved his hand. "I'll grab some after Grady still makes it better than you." I smiled, but my stomach fluttered. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Rushed, like he needed to get somewhere fast. He looked like a man with something on his mind. Something heavy. He slung his bag over his shoulder and reached into his coat pocket, then paused. He frowned, patted his other pocket, then checked the kitchen counter. "I forgot my towel," he muttered. I offered him one of mine, but he shook his head. No. Ill manage it was so minor a missed towel. But Dad was a creature of habit. He didn't forget things. He had lists on his fridge, for everything workout days, oil change reminders, even how often to check the smoke detectors. That kind of mind doesn't forget a towel, and then something else. His phone was still on the kitchen table. "Hey, you forgot your phone." I called after him, grabbing it and heading toward the door, but when I opened it, he was already gone. I stood there, phone in hand, a little confused. He never left his phone. He'd even gone back home once after driving 20 minutes just because he'd forgotten it. I walked back inside, staring at the screen. No texts, no calls. Just a single calendar event that read, Midtown, 600 a.m. I told myself it was fine, that maybe he was flustered about something, that even Dad could have an off morning. I brewed the coffee and went about my day, but something in my gut whispered that something wasn't right. Hours passed. I expected him back at 7:30, the usual time, with a bag of pancakes and sausage biscuits from Grady's, and that slow smile of his. He always knocked 3 times before letting himself in. That knock never came. By 8:15, I texted him, still hungry. You forget the pancakes. No reply by 8:45. I called straight to voicemail by 9:30. I drove to the gym. I remember how my stomach twisted tighter with each red light. I told myself it was traffic, that he probably ran into someone and stayed to chat. He wasn't usually chatty, but hey, anything was possible, right? When I got to Midtown Fitness, the receptionist looked at me like I was a stranger. Denny Rowe. "No, I don't think he's been in today," she said, flipping through the check-in log. His last visit was yesterday, 6:01 a.m. I asked her to double-check. She humored me. Scanned again. Still nothing. That's when something inside me went cold. Not panicked yet. Just quiet, like a switch had been flipped. I walked out of the gym and sat in my car phone, pressed to my chest, praying it would buzz with a call from him. It didn't at the time. I still didn't know I had just witnessed the beginning of a mystery that would consume the next 13 years of my life. All I knew was that something was wrong. The missing towel, the left behind phone, the glance he gave the coffee pot like he wanted to say something but didn't. Those weren't accidents. They were warnings, but I didn't know how to read them. Not yet. Grief doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks in, quiet, persistent, like water dripping through a ceiling you don't notice until the floor buckles beneath you. After Dad vanished, the first week was a blur of movement. Police reports, phone calls, driving to every hospital and gym in the Tri-County area, repeating the same sentence to every stranger I met. My father went missing. He left for the gym. Thursday morning and never came back. I clung to the details like a life raft. The gray hoodie, the black gym bag, his scar on the back of his hand, as if saying them enough times would bring him back. But by the third week, everything started slowing down. People stopped checking in. The police stopped updating me. The flyer on the bulletin board at Grady's was pulled down, replaced by an ad for a summer barbecue. And I just kept going through the motions. I went back to work. I stood in front of a room full of fifth graders talking about fractions and weather cycles, while pretending my life hadn't caved in. I graded homework late into the night because the silence of my apartment was unbearable. At home, I stopped using the dining table. I started eating cereal straight out of the box standing by the sink. His gym card stayed in the top kitchen drawer. I opened that drawer 20 times a day and never moved it. It was like some part of me believed that if I kept everything exactly the same, he might return and slip right back into place. But time doesn't work that way, and neither does grief. Soon the weight of his absence started erasing me. Not in big dramatic ways, but slowly, quietly. It started with how people spoke to me. At school, the vice principal would give me sympathetic glances in staff meetings, but no one asked anymore. It was as if they had decided my story was over. Just another sad event they didn't know how to help with. I became the teacher whose dad disappeared. Not Karina, just a quiet shadow of who I used to be. Then came the invitations I stopped receiving, the family dinners I was told about after they happened. My cousins said things like, "We figured you might need space," or "We didn't want to overwhelm you." But that wasn't it. They were uncomfortable. My grief made them uncomfortable, so they chose to look away. Even my Aunt Josie, my father's younger sister, started avoiding my calls. She used to call every Friday like clockwork. After a few months, the calls became texts, then silence. When I finally reached her, she told me gently, "Karina, sometimes people don't want to be found. You need to let go, let go." He was my father, the only family I had left. How do you let go of someone who tucked you into bed every night of your childhood, who showed up for every graduation, who left you sticky notes that said things like, "Don't forget your umbrella storm coming. I didn't need space. I needed someone to sit across from me and say, 'You're not crazy for still believing he might come back,' but no one did. So I stopped talking about it altogether. That's when the real erosion began. Not of my memory or my mind, but of my sense of self. I didn't know who I was without him. I was still showing up to work, still smiling at checkout clerks, but it felt like I was watching myself from a distance, like my body had learned to perform a version of me, while the real me was somewhere else floating lost. I started sleeping with the TV on just so I wouldn't have to hear the quiet. I left every light on in the apartment. I couldn't even bear to walk past the gym anymore. Just the sight of people in workout clothes made my stomach turn. Sunday mornings were the worst. That was our ritual. Pancakes at his place. When that first Sunday came after his disappearance, I cooked the same breakfast we always had, set 2 plates, waited. And when I finally realized I was just sitting in a room with an empty chair, I cried harder than I've ever cried in my life. After that, I couldn't go near syrup without tearing up. I stopped cooking, stopped going out on weekends, stopped calling anyone just to talk. I became invisible in my own life. And the hardest part, no one noticed, or maybe they did, and they just didn't know what to do with me anymore. I wasn't angry. Not then. I was just tired, so tired of waiting, tired of being strong, tired of telling myself maybe tomorrow he'll walk through the door, because every tomorrow that came without him felt like another nail in the coffin of my old life. One night, about 6 months after he vanished, I sat on the floor of my apartment and opened the last voicemail he ever left me, just to hear his voice again. "Hey baby, heading to the gym. Text you when I'm out. Love you." That was it. I listened to it 17 times, then I saved it under the name Don't Delete. That message became my lifeline. Proof that he was real, that I didn't just imagine how much he loved me. But as the months bled into, years even, that began to feel distant. I wasn't just grieving him. I was slowly disappearing right alongside him. There's a specific kind of pain that only hits you when you're already half broken. Not a blowout, not a scream. Just a quiet moment where someone sees your emptiness and laughs. It was a Thursday afternoon in early spring, about 10 months after Dad disappeared. The school where I worked was holding its annual family open house. Parents came to meet teachers, check on progress, admire glitter-glued art projects. It used to be one of my favorite days of the year. I always wore my nicest blouse, printed out extra welcome packets, and brought in cookies for the kids. That year, I almost didn't go. I hadn't bought a new outfit in over a year. My face looked drawn and my eyes had that dull, shadowed look you get when sleep has become something optional. But I told myself I had to show up. Not for the school, for the kids. They still looked at me like I was solid, dependable Miss Rowe, and I didn't want to let them down. I remember standing near the bulletin board where the students had written essays titled, "My Hero." Most of them wrote about their moms or dads. One boy, Matthew, had drawn a big picture of his father lifting a couch with one hand and a cat in the other. "Hez strong and always comes home." The caption read, that last part made my stomach twist. I looked away and started organizing a stack of take-home flyers when I overheard it. Soft, sharp, unmistakable two women stood just a few feet behind me, chatting over juice cups and cheese cubes. One of them, a tall blonde with expensive glasses, tilted her head and whispered, "That's her right." The teacher, whose dad just walked out. The other woman, a short redhead with a tight smile, replied, just loud enough for me to hear, "Yeah, she still lives alone, poor thing. Some people just can't let go. Maybe he had a reason." They both laughed. Not a full laugh, a short, pitying chuckle. Like I was a punchline to a sad story they didn't really care about. I froze. The paper in my hand crinkled. My cheeks burned. But I didn't turn around. I didn't say a word. I just stared at the bulletin board like my body had gone numb, and all I could think was, they're laughing at my grief, and worse. I understood why. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a ghost with a name tag. A 30-something woman who still lit a candle every July, like some kind of tragic movie character. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I didn't talk much in the break room anymore. So I became easy to talk about. It wasn't the only time. There was the time I walked into the teacher's lounge and heard the chatter stop cold. Heard a soda can hiss open, someone shuffle awkwardly. The silence was louder than anything they could have said. Then there was the moment in the grocery store when I ran into a former student's father. He used to greet me with warmth, but this time his voice dropped and he muttered, "Still no sign of your dad, huh?" I gave a weak smile. "No," I said. And he replied with a shrug. "Some folks just aren't meant to stay. It was such a casual cruelty. Said like my father was some drifter who'd grown bored and moved on, not a man whose absence ripped my life apart. It was in those moments I began to feel like maybe the world didn't want people who grieved too long. There's a timeline. It seems an expiration date for sorrow. Cry for a few weeks, sure, mention them in passing for a few months, but after a year, people start looking at you like your sadness is a stain they don't want on their white carpet. So I learned to hide it better smiled more, spoke less, wore makeup even when I didn't feel like it, just so people would stop saying, "You look tired." But inside, something had shifted. That night after open house, I sat in the staff bathroom with the lights off my back against the wall, listening to the buzz of the vending machine. I cried quietly, not because of what they said, but because I realized they saw me as done. Like the story had already ended, but what they didn't understand was that my silence wasn't weakness. It was the sound of me surviving one humiliating day at a time. Later, as I walked home, I looked up at the sky and whispered to myself, "You are not crazy. You are not forgotten." And I made a quiet vow. If the world had turned away from my father's story, then I would carry it alone if I had to, humiliated or not, because I knew the truth. My father didn't just vanish. And one day, somehow, I would find out why. By the end of year 2, I didn't recognize myself anymore. Not just physically, though, yes, I had lost weight. My hair had thinned. My clothes had dulled into the same rotation of gray and navy. But the real change was deeper. I didn't laugh the same, didn't move the same. It was like my edges had been sanded down by the constant abrasion of pretending I was okay. I'd become the kind of person people speak softly around, the kind who makes others feel uncomfortable. Not because I did anything wrong, but because grief makes people question their own safety. If a man like my father, so solid, so routine, could just disappear, then anything could happen to anyone. People didn't want that reminder in the teacher's lounge, or the staff meetings, or the parent-teacher conferences. So eventually, I stopped being invited to committee planning. I stopped being asked to supervise field trips. The younger teachers started calling me Miss R instead of Karina. I was no longer a person to them. I was a cautionary tale wrapped in a cardigan. I tried not to take it personally. But when the principal gently pulled me aside one day and said, "We've noticed you've seemed distant. Have you considered taking a leave?" I heard the subtext, "You're not wanted here anymore." I nodded like it made sense. I even thanked her. I packed up my things 2 days later without telling anyone. It was my last day. I left behind a ceramic apple on my desk and a box of graded essays on plants and pollination. No farewell party. No one followed me out to the parking lot. Just the sound of the door closing behind me. I didn't cry until I got home. And even then, the tears didn't come in sobs. They came like a leak, quiet and slow. I sat in the center of my living room, surrounded by silence, and realized I had nothing to wake up for the next day. No job, no family, no plan. I was 36, and for the first time in my adult life, I had no titles left. Not teacher, not daughter, in any active sense. Just a woman in an apartment that smelled faintly of old laundry and forgotten hope. People assumed I'd move on, start a new life somewhere, maybe date, travel, rebuild. But I couldn't, not because I didn't want to, but because something inside me still felt unfinished. The kind of unfinished that keeps you tethered to the past like an invisible thread. So I stayed. I canceled my gym membership. Couldn't stand the look of treadmills. I stopped driving past Dad's old street. I stopped calling Aunt Josie even though I wanted to. Her voice had changed toward me. Too patient, too distant, like she knew something I didn't but had chosen to stop sharing it. I picked up shifts at a bookstore downtown. Quiet work, folding book jackets, organizing displays, ringing up college kids who didn't know how to look you in the eye. No one asked questions there. It was the kind of job you took when you didn't want to be noticed, and that was what I wanted. Invisibility. Some nights I'd walk home in the rain without an umbrella, just to feel something. I found comfort in wet clothes and shivering alone under lamplight. It gave my pain a shape. A temperature. I didn't make any big decisions. I didn't scream or rage or sell all my belongings and move to Bali. That's not the kind of grief I had. Mine was quieter, slower, the kind that wears you down, not out. Eventually, people stopped asking about me altogether. Neighbors who used to wave when I got my mail started avoiding eye contact. Friends I'd known since college stopped inviting me to brunch. Even my voicemail box stayed empty. No messages, just expired, reminders and robocalls from banks. I didn't blame them. I had become a shadow. But somewhere buried under all that numbness was something still alive. A flicker. A coil of heat deep inside me that refused to die completely. I didn't have the strength to chase answers anymore, but I also didn't have the strength to forget. And that middle ground between collapse and hope was where I lived. Until one morning, about 3 years after the disappearance, I quietly packed up my father's remaining belongings from my closet. I didn't throw them away. I didn't donate them. I just placed them gently into a cedar chest I bought from an antique store, locked it and slid it under my bed. Not because I was letting go, but because I knew that part of my life, the searching, the waiting, the endless asking, had to stop. For now, everyone assumed I had finally accepted it, that I had finally moved on. But they were wrong. I hadn't moved on. I had just moved quietly, because deep inside me, something still whispered. This story isn't finished yet, and I would wait. Months, years, even decades for that whisper to return as a voice. One day it did, and it came in the shape of a rusted key. There's a point where grief stops being a feeling and becomes a landscape, a place you live in, a place you wake up inside day after day without realizing you've stopped hoping to ever leave. For me, that place was apartment 4, see a 2-room rental above a pawn shop on the east side of Asheville. The ceilings were low. The windows jammed in the winter. The radiator clanged like a wounded animal when it tried to work. I moved in 2 years after I left the school. After I gave up on the life I thought I'd be living by now, I remember thinking as I signed the lease, this is temporary, just a stopgap until I found my feet again. But temporary has a way of stretching into forever when your heart's still broken. The place was always quiet, too quiet. No laughter, no footsteps, just me. The buzz of the fridge and the distant sounds of the city trying to move forward without me. I worked part-time at a bookstore that mostly smelled like old coffee and paper dust. I folded bookmarks, shelved books I no longer had the energy to read. I pretended to be someone who was just in a quiet season of life, not someone who had entirely unraveled. But the truth, I had stopped believing I mattered. I stopped cooking. Most nights' dinner was a single slice of toast or a spoonful of peanut butter. I stopped opening the mail. What was the point? Bills kept coming. Whether you looked at them or not, I let voicemail pile up. When my old dentist's office called to say I was due for a cleaning, I laughed out loud. I hadn't smiled wide enough in years to care about my teeth. Then one night in early January, cold, bitter, unforgiving, I hit my lowest point. I'd just gotten home from work. My boots were soaked. The bookstore manager had gently reminded me that my hours might be cut after winter budget thing, he said. Nothing personal. I barely heard him. I was too distracted by the pink envelope I found taped to my front door. Final notice, rent delinquent. It was the third one. I stepped inside, tossed my soaked coat onto the chair, and stood in the middle of my kitchen with the lights off. And I couldn't move. Not because I was frozen or confused, but because something inside me had finally gone still, completely still. Like a candle's last flicker before it surrenders to smoke. I dropped to the floor, not in some dramatic heap. I just sat slowly, quietly, my back against the cupboard, my hands in my lap, staring at nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there for hours. I remember watching the red light of my answering machine blink and blink and blink like a heartbeat. Someone had called 3 times that day. I didn't check who. Eventually, the radiator stopped clanking. The apartment went cold. I didn't get up to grab a blanket. I remember whispering not to anyone in particular, but to the ceiling. "Where are you, Dad?" And then I said it again. "Where are you?" I don't know what I expected. A sign. A knock. Maybe the walls to peel back and show me the truth. But nothing came. and for the first time since he disappeared, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe I was meant to fade out, too. The next morning, I woke up on the floor, numb and sore. My back ached. My legs had pins and needles. I dragged myself into the bathroom to splash water on my face. That's when I noticed it, a small purplish bruise over my left eye. I must have hit the corner of the counter on the way down last night. But I hadn't even noticed. I touched it gently and winced, not from pain, but from shame. I looked in the mirror, not at my face, not really, at the woman standing behind the glass. She looked like someone I didn't recognize. Eyes, hollow lips chapped, hair pulled into a loose bun with strands falling out like she'd stopped caring. And that woman wasn't Karina Rowe. She wasn't a teacher. She wasn't a daughter. She wasn't even a person. She was just what was left. That was the bottom. Not a hospital room, not a police report, not some overdose or rescue. Just that woman in the mirror staring back with nothing left to give. But here's the strange thing about rock bottom. It's solid, you can't fall through it. There's no deeper. And once you realize that a single thought begins to take shape, if I'm not going to die, then I have to live. That thought didn't change everything overnight, but it planted something. The tiniest ember in a long-dead fire. I didn't feel hopeful. I didn't feel strong. I just felt done. Being nothing. So I stood up, wiped the mirror, clean, brushed my hair, put on the same worn sweater, and stepped outside. The sun was out for the first time in days. It didn't warm me, but it reminded me the world was still turning. And maybe, just maybe, it hadn't turned completely away from me. I never expected that my life would change on an ordinary Tuesday morning. There was no dramatic music, no thunder, just the smell of burnt coffee and the sound of my radiator sputtering back to life. I'd been staying up late again, barely sleeping. Old habits. I'd wake around 7, sit at the kitchen table in my oversized cardigan, and sip from the same chipped mug I'd used for years, the one with the faded quote on the side that said, "Start where you are." I hated that mug. It felt like a cruel joke some mornings. Start where you are. What if? Where you are is nowhere. Still, I used it. Rituals have power even when they hurt. That morning, I took the mug from the dish rack and poured in the last of the lukewarm coffee from the pot. I stirred in some powdered creamer. I didn't even notice it at first. Just a soft clink metal hitting ceramic. I thought maybe I dropped the spoon in too hard. I took a sip. It tasted off metallic like pennies. I set the mug down and peered inside. That's when I saw it. A small rusted key nestled at the bottom. Thin, jagged attached with peeling, clear tape to the underside of a tiny plastic film. I blinked. My breath caught. At first, I thought it had somehow been stuck to the mug for years, hidden beneath the coffee stain ring that refused to scrub off. But it'd washed that cup so many times I could do it in my sleep. There was no way I wouldn't have noticed a key, especially not one taped inside. With trembling hands, I reached in and pulled it out. It felt familiar. Not just the size or the weight, but the tag on it faded but still legible. Locker 212. My fingers trembled harder, and then I saw the note folded tight and pressed between the tape and the base of the key. It was dry, fragile. The edges curled slightly like it had been waiting a long, long time to be opened. I peeled it open slowly, terrified it might disintegrate in my hands. 5 words, open it before 6 p.m. That's it, no name, no signature. But I didn't need one. The handwriting was enough slanted letters, the dramatic loop in the capital P, the slightly smudged ink from where the pen must be paused too long. It was my father's, I knew it, the way you know your own heartbeat. I hadn't seen his handwriting in over a decade, but I'd recognize it in a sea of thousands. He wrote this, and he wanted me to find it today. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. My whole chest tightened. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. The key. The locker number. The message, all of it real. Physical, tangible. Not a dream, not a memory. Proof for years. I'd begged for a sign, a voice, a clue. Something to tell me I wasn't insane for holding on. Something to justify the candles, the Sunday breakfasts alone, the refusal to fully grieve. And now, here it was. Dropped into my life like a stone into still water, I sat down at the table, key in hand. Heart pounding like I was running a race. I didn't remember starting Midtown Gym. That was where he always went. It had closed years ago or so, I thought. But buildings don't disappear. Lockers don't vanish. If 212 still existed, then something was waiting for me inside. I checked the time. 8:12 a.m. The message said before 6 p.m. Why the deadline? What would happen if I didn't make it? My head spun with questions, but deep inside something shifted, a quiet certainty rising from under all the grief. This wasn't random. Someone, maybe my father, had orchestrated this, which meant he hadn't just disappeared. He had gone silent on purpose. And now, for reasons I couldn't yet understand, he was speaking again. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't call anyone. I just grabbed my coat, slipped the key into my pocket, and walked out the door. My heart was thudding against my ribs, not from fear, but from something else, hope. That was the terrifying part. Hope was heavier than sadness. Hope could break you if it let you down again, but I couldn't ignore it. I took the bus across town, gripping the key in my coat pocket the whole time like it might vanish if I let go. As I rode past the old neighborhoods, past places I used to go with Dad, the ice cream stand near the park, the bookstore where we spent rainy afternoons, the past came alive around me. And then just beyond the intersection, I saw it. The Midtown building. New name on the sign, Wellcore Health Recovery Center. But it was the same brick walls, same side entrance, same parking lot where he used to wave at me before heading in. I stepped inside. The air smelled different. Minty modern, but the bones of the place hadn't changed. There was still a reception desk, still the echo of sneakers on polished floors, still a locker room I paid for a guest day pass. My fingers shook as I signed the form, and then I walked to the locker hallway. Rows and rows of silver doors, numbered in bold black. 200, 210, 212. There it was, old, slightly dented. The paint near the lock scratched from years of use. I took out key, slid it into the lock and turned. With a soft click, the door opened. Inside sat a single black duffel bag, dusty, untouched. It looked like it had been waiting for me all this time. The second the locker door creaked open, something inside me shifted. It wasn't relief. It wasn't fear. It was something harder to define, like a fog I hadn't known I was walking through had suddenly parted, and for the first time in years, I could see a shape ahead. The duffel bag was black canvas, the kind my dad used to carry everywhere, not just to the gym, but to road trips, beach days, and even family picnics. It had his initials stitched on the side, DR. The thread had faded, but the letters were unmistakable. I reached in slowly, almost afraid the bag would vanish if I moved too fast. The zipper stuck a little. I tugged it gently. Then again, a little harder. It opened. Inside were only a few items, but they told a story louder than words. A flash drive. A manila envelope with my name written in block letters. Corina. A folded cloth and a small worn-out paperback, To Kill a Mockingbird. His favorite. No gym towel, no sneakers, no water bottle. This wasn't a bag meant for a workout. This was a message, a time capsule, a clue wrapped in memory. I sat on a bench nearby, hands shaking, and pulled the envelope close. My name on it. Not baby or sweetheart, just Corina. Like he wanted me to know this wasn't comfort. It was instruction. It was truth. I didn't open it there. I couldn't not in that building. Not under fluorescent lights and strangers walking past with headphones in. This was something sacred, something that demanded stillness. I tucked the bag close to my chest and left without speaking to anyone. The walk home was a blur. My feet barely touched the ground. The key that had been a mystery just hours before now felt like the ignition to something massive, something buried, something alive. I got home, locked the door, and turned off my phone. I sat on the floor with the bag beside me and stared at it for a full 5 minutes. My thoughts wouldn't quiet. My mind bounced between questions and memories like static on an old radio. Why now? Why 13 years later? Was my father alive? Had he been watching me all this time? I opened the envelope first. Inside were 8 pages of his handwriting front and back, each line tight, urgent, yet unmistakably his, had always written, like he spoke slow, thoughtful, but impossible to ignore. The letter didn't begin with "Dear Karina." It started like this. If you're reading this, it means I've waited long enough. My breath caught, I read on. He wrote about things I never knew. People I'd never met, names I didn't recognize but would soon come to learn mattered more than I imagined. He mentioned a gym manager who got in over his head, an investment scheme that started small, laundering money through memberships, equipment orders, even supplement sales. And then he mentioned Barry, Uncle Barry. My father's younger brother, the one who used to bring donuts on Sundays, the one who stopped calling me after the first year. According to the letter, Barry wasn't just involved, he was central, a key figure in the laundering ring, had used the gym as a front. When my father found out, he confronted him, not to expose him, but to warn him, to beg him to stop before it all unraveled. But Barry wasn't interested in stopping. Dad said he received threats. Not from strangers, but from people he thought were friends. He started being followed, watched. And then one day his car brakes failed on the freeway. He survived, but barely. That's when he knew he had to disappear, not for himself, but for me. The letter said, if anything happened to me, they'd come for you next, and I wasn't willing to gamble your life on their silence. So he vanished, carefully, deliberately, with help from someone he trusted, someone he never named. Had left me the key in a place he hoped I'd one day discover at the mug. The same mug he gave me a year before he disappeared. The one I used every morning without fail. That part broke me. Even in his absence, he was still watching over me. Still hoping I'd hang on long enough to find the truth. Still trusting I'd open the locker when the time was right. And here I was, 13 years later, finally reading the letter he'd written in secret. When I reached the final page, I was no longer crying. I was no longer stunned. I was awake. That's the only word for it. For years, I'd felt like I was living inside a snow globe, sealed in glass, frozen, shaken by forces I couldn't see. But now I felt the glass cracking. The flash drive sat next to the letter. I plugged it into my old laptop. On it were 2 video files, one labeled 212. CCTV, and another named Confession Barry. I didn't press play yet. Not because I was afraid of what I'd see, but because for the first time in over a decade, I knew the truth was within reach. No more guessing. No more begging for answers. No more walking around with the weight of silence on my chest. My father hadn't abandoned me. He'd protected me at the cost of everything. I was no longer just the woman whose father vanished. I was the woman about to finish what he started. I didn't tell anyone what I had found. Not yet. There's a kind of power in silence, especially when you've lived so long without any. For over a decade, I had been drowning in unanswered questions. Now I had the answers, or at least the beginning of them, and I wasn't about to let them slip away by speaking too soon. So I began to prepare quietly, deliberately, like a woman setting the final stones in a long-buried foundation. The first thing I did was make copies, 3 of them. One for the letter, one for the videos, and one for myself. I uploaded the files to an encrypted cloud folder using a free trial account under a fake name. I stored a flash drive copy inside a Ziploc bag and duct taped it to the underside of my kitchen sink. I didn't even trust my own laptop, so I bought a used Chromebook from a pawn shop to do all my digging. I told no one. Not the bookstore manager who asked why. I'd suddenly started arriving early. Not the neighbor who noticed I no longer lingered in the hallway for small talk. Not even Aunt Josie, especially not her. Because the deeper I went, the more the puzzle pieces started to sharpen, and what I found made me sick to my stomach. The 212 CCTV file was grainy footage from a locker room camera dated July 18, 2012, the day before Dad disappeared. There he was clear as day talking to a man I didn't recognize. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in street clothes, not gym gear. They were arguing. The man gestured aggressively, pointed to a folder Dad was holding. Dad shook his head, stepped back. The man leaned in, said something I couldn't hear, then walked away. My father looked shaken. He sat on the bench, buried his face in his hands. I paused the video. I had never seen that expression on his face before. Not even in memory. And then I opened the second video. Confession Barry. It wasn't a formal confession. It was a phone video. Secretly recorded by Dad. I assumed Barry sat in a booth at what looked like a bar. He was drunk, slurring, laughing. He said things like, "Denny thinks he's going to clean it up. He doesn't get it. It's bigger than him now. He talks, he goes under." Simple. That gym paid for 3 vacation homes. You think I'm giving that up because he grew a conscience. He knows too much. And if he opens his mouth, he's gone. I don't care if he's my brother. I played it 3 times each time the words hit harder. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a man who got in too deep and panicked. This was betrayal from blood. And now I knew my father had been silenced, not by strangers, but by his own family. So I started planning. Not for revenge, for truth. I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Professor Margaret Wynne, one of Dad's old friends from the local university. She used to be an investigative journalist before teaching journalism ethics, the kind of woman who didn't scare easy. I emailed her under a fake name, then arranged to meet her at a quiet cafe near the river. I handed her the flash drive in an envelope and said, "I need someone who knows what to do with this." She watched me closely. "Do you know what's on here?" I nodded. "It involves my father, and it needs to be seen." She didn't ask questions, just said, "Give me 3 days." I walked out without turning back. At home, I cleaned. Not out of habit, but preparation. I sorted my papers. Shredded. Anything personal. I didn't know if Barry or anyone else was still watching, but I wasn't about to leave trails. I even changed the lock on my apartment door and placed a small wedge under the window frame. Something had woken up inside me. Not fear. Not anxiety. Clarity. This was no longer about grief. This was about accountability. I started journaling again, not about the past, but about the facts. Names, dates, times. Everything I remembered from that last year with Dad. His unusual calls, the odd tension in his eyes. That moment, he said he needed to clear some old junk. It all meant something now. I found the gym's old website through a digital archive. I cross-referenced staff members, found addresses, even ran background checks. The man from the CCTV video, his name was Kevin Pratt. He used to run equipment procurement. He vanished the same month my father did, moved states, changed jobs. That wasn't a coincidence, but I wasn't going after him. Not yet. I needed to be smart, so I kept my head down. Worked my shifts at the bookstore like everything was normal. Smiled politely, nodded when asked how I was doing. And every night before bed, I placed the locker key back in its original place, inside the mug, like a reminder to myself. This story isn't over. Because now I had direction. I had truth. And I had something else I hadn't felt in over a decade. Control. It didn't happen all at once. There was no explosion, no spotlight, no dramatic moment when the world stopped spinning. But I felt it, the quiet shift. Like a tide changing direction under the surface, and this time I wasn't the one being pulled under. 3 days after I handed Professor Wynne the flash drive, she called me. No voicemail, just a text. "Meet me tomorrow. You were right. And it's bigger than you think. We met at the same cafe." She brought a manila folder and the kind of look you give someone when they've stumbled into something dangerous. "There's enough in this footage to open an investigation," she said calmly. "But it needs the right push. If we go to the wrong source, it'll be buried. If we go too loud, it'll get shut down." I nodded slowly. "So what's the right move?" She slid the folder across the table. Inside were printed stills from the videos, timestamps, transcripts, notes connecting names and financial transactions. She had turned my grief into evidence. My father's silence into a case file. I've sent it to a contact at WNCR News. Quietly has vetted. Has been looking into gym-linked fraud cases for years. Does he know my name? No, she said firmly, not yet. Just that, a whistleblower close to a missing person passed this on. That was the plan. I would remain anonymous. Let the evidence speak. Let the reporters and lawyers and systems do the work, but power doesn't wait politely in the wings. Once it starts to shift, it has a way of revealing the people who once held it and how desperate they become when they feel it slipping through their hands. That same evening, I got a phone call from an unknown number I didn't answer. But the voicemail chilled me, Karina. "It's Barry." His voice was strained low. "I heard you've been asking questions, digging up old ghosts. Look, I don't know what you think you found, but it's not what it looks like. Don't get involved in things you don't understand. Please let this go." He didn't sound angry. He sounded nervous. That told me everything I needed to know. The power had shifted. He knew something was coming. The next morning, WNCR ran a teaser story, just a 3-minute segment buried in the middle of the 6 a.m. report. "Former local gym, tied to suspicious financial activity, police reopen missing person case." From 2012. They didn't name me. They didn't name my father, but they showed the building. Talked about a gym manager who vanished and mentioned undisclosed insider sources who provided video evidence implicating former employees in money laundering and intimidation tactics. By noon, the clip was trending online. By 3 p.m., I had 5 missed calls from unknown numbers, one from a blocked caller. At 5:17 p.m., my apartment buzzer rang. I didn't answer it. I didn't even move. I just sat on the floor in my hallway holding the letter from Dad in one hand and the mug in the other. Let them knock. Let them guess. I had spent 13 years being invisible, powerless, looked at with pity, then forgotten. Now they were watching me without even knowing it was me. That night, I checked the reporter's Twitter feed, had posted a follow-up clip surveillance footage of a man believed to be the missing whistleblower, timestamped 24 hours before his disappearance. It was the video from Locker 212. My father on camera holding that folder, looking directly into the lens for a split second. The public response was immediate. People asked who he was, where he went, why no one followed up, how something like this could be ignored for so long, and suddenly he mattered again, not as a ghost, not as a missing person, but as evidence, as a man who tried to do the right thing and vanished for it. And in that wave of attention, that curiosity, that outrage, I felt something strange stirring in me. Not satisfaction, strength. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim in my own story. I felt like the author, and the people who had pushed me into the shadows were now squinting into the light. The bookstore manager, who never once asked why I stopped talking about my father, suddenly mentioned the news story with wide eyes. "Wild stuff, huh?" he said, not realizing he was talking to the reason it existed. A former colleague from the school sent me a Facebook message after years of silence. "I think I owe you an apology. I'm so sorry I never asked how you were doing. And Barry." He left one more voicemail. Just 2 words. Call me I didn't. Because this wasn't his story to steer anymore. It wasn't about his guilt or his shame or his excuses. It was about truth, about reckoning, about a daughter who'd been treated like an afterthought and finally realized she was the key. The world hadn't shifted because I yelled. It shifted because I stopped, shrinking. Because I moved in silence. Because I believed in the power of a name written in block letters on an old envelope. Corrina. The girl they all forgot. The woman who remembered everything. The email came on a Thursday afternoon, simple, professional, and brief. Subject line: REWNCR investigation, on camera statement opportunity. The body read, "We understand you may have a personal connection to the locker. 212, materials and missing person file. We would like to give you the space to share your story either publicly or anonymously. We believe the public deserves to hear from the source. Let us know if you'd be willing to speak." My first instinct was to close the laptop. For days, I'd been watching the investigation unfold from a distance. The story had grown legs. More people were coming forward, former gym employees, a disgruntled accountant, even a local councilwoman whose brother had once invested in the gym's renovation. The reporter was careful. They never used my name, and they kept my father's identity vague. But now the weight of it was shifting toward me. They wanted my voice. I closed the laptop gently and sat still. I thought about Dad. How he must be wrestled with the same question: speak or stay silent, protect or expose. He had chosen silence for me, but now I had to decide what silence was protecting and who it was protecting from. It wasn't fear holding me back anymore. It was something deeper, the knowledge that once I spoke, there would be no going back, that my grief, once private and folded neatly inside the corners of my life, would become part of something public, messy and irreversible. But then I remembered that look on Dad's face in the video. The exhaustion, the fear, the weight of everything he knew but couldn't say. He owed him more than silence. I opened the laptop and, ready to speak, I typed. "But I want to do it on my terms." They agreed, a one-on-one interview, no press conference, no cameras, unless I gave consent. They just wanted the story raw, unfiltered. The interview was set for the following week, but something tugged at me. I wasn't done yet. There was one conversation I needed to have first, Barry. I hadn't spoken to him in over 10 years. The last time I saw him was at a police station, where he gave a short, unremarkable statement about Dad being a private man, who probably needed a break, and then he vanished from my life until the investigation forced him back into the light. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. So I called him. He answered on the second ring. "Corrina," he said, like, my name was a stone in his mouth. "You shouldn't be doing this. What exactly am I doing, Barry?" I asked, my voice calm, telling the truth. There was a long pause, then a soft exhale. It wasn't supposed to go this far. No, I said it was supposed to disappear, just like he did. He didn't deny it. Not once. He didn't shout or insult or make threats. That was almost worse, the way he surrendered with silence. I didn't want him hurt. He finally said, "I just wanted him quiet." I let that hang in, the air. His words felt heavier than rage. "You got what you wanted," I said, "but you didn't kill the truth. You just buried it, and am digging it out piece by piece." He whispered, "You don't know what you're inviting." I leaned into the phone, no. "Barry, you don't know what I've survived?" And then I hung up. I didn't need his fear. I didn't need his explanations. I just needed to be heard. The day of the interview, I wore my father's old cardigan, the one I'd kept folded at the back of my closet for years. It still smelled faintly like motor oil and cologne, like him. We met in a quiet studio. Just me, the journalist, and a single camera. They mic'd me up, offered me water, told me I could stop any time I needed, and then the lights came on. I looked into the lens and imagined I was looking straight at my father. "My name is Corrina Rowe," I said, "and this is what really happened to my dad." I didn't cry. I didn't falter. I told the truth. About the gym, the threats, the videos. The key in the coffee mug, I described the years of waiting, the way people laughed behind my back, the hollow birthdays, the burned toast, the dreams that never came back. I ended with this. My father wasn't lost. He was pushed, and he stayed silent to protect me, But I'm done being protected. It's time to protect him now, his name, his truth, his story. Afterward, the producer took off my mic and simply said thank you. The segment aired 3 days later. It didn't go viral in the explosive way some stories do, but it mattered. People watched, they listened, they posted comments that made me cry. She never gave up. This woman is stronger than most people I know. I hope she finds peace and justice. And most importantly, I remember Denny. He helped fix my car once. Good man, they remembered him, and they knew now he hadn't disappeared because he was weak. He had disappeared because he was brave. That moment sitting alone in my apartment as his name echoed through the world again wasn't about revenge. It was about return. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen. Not just a father, but a voice mine I thought, speaking my truth, would bring closure. But the truth had other plans. A week after my interview aired, I received a certified letter. No return address. Just my name in bold type letters. I signed for it with a strange calm, like part of me had been expecting one last ripple. I sat on the couch, held it for a long moment, then opened it. Inside was a single-page legal document, a court motion to unseal a safety deposit box registered in my father's name. The box had been flagged during a sweep by federal investigators connected to the reopened laundering case tied to Midtown Gym. It had sat untouched in a downtown bank vault since 2011. 12 years untouched. And now it was legally mine to access. The motion had been initiated by the FBI, but they wanted me to be present. The appointment was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. I didn't sleep the night before. All I could think about was what could possibly be inside a box my father left behind before he vanished, before he left me behind. Part of me feared it would be empty. Another part feared it wouldn't be, and that whatever I found would tear open all the wounds I'd just barely begun to close. That morning, I wore the same coat I'd worn the day I found the key. The mug stayed on my kitchen table untouched, but now sacred. When I arrived at the bank, the federal officer assigned to the case met me with a solemn nod. The vault was colder than I expected. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones and makes everything feel more serious than it already is. Box 814. The bank manager slid it from the wall of metal drawers and carried it to a table. He placed it down and stepped aside. "It's yours," the officer said. I opened the lid. Inside were two things: a bundle of old cassette tapes labeled in, Dad's handwriting, and a sealed letter, thick yellowed. My name written in black marker, Karina Final. I reached for the letter first. My hands trembled. Inside was a confession, but not from my father. It was from Kevin Pratt, the man in CCTV footage, the one who had argued with my father the day before he vanished. He had written it as part of a deal gone wrong, one my father had clearly tried to broker before things spiraled. The letter explained everything. Kevin had been a fixer, a cleanup man for illegal accounts run through the gym. He was tasked with intimidating, silencing, or removing anyone who asked questions. He admitted that Barry had pushed for my father to be handled, not killed, but scared into disappearing. But Kevin didn't follow through, because he had once served with my dad in the reserves, back in the early 80s. He knew Denny Rowe wasn't the kind of man you could shake with threats, so instead he warned him, told him to go dark, told him he'd buy him 3 days before the others caught on. He offered him a chance to run, to vanish, to live, and my father took it. He didn't leave because he wanted to. He left because it was the only way to protect me and the people who would have been caught in the crossfire. That alone would have been enough. But there was more. Kevin's confession came with taped recordings, hours of conversations with Barry and others involved in the laundering ring. My father had convinced him to record everything to create a trail of evidence in case something ever happens. And Kevin had honored that promise, left it all locked away unreachable until someone brave enough opened the vault. That someone was me. The recordings contained names, accounts, payoffs, even the involvement of two public officials whose campaigns had been funded through those dirty gym accounts. This wasn't just about my father anymore. It was about an entire network, one my dad had tried to expose before it was too late. The FBI took the contents and launched a formal case. Barry was arrested 2 weeks later, charged with conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. The story made national headlines, but they never knew the full story, the part where a daughter lit candles for 13 years, believing her father was gone. The part where silence became survival, the part where grief became fuel. That night, I sat on my couch, letter in hand, tears running silently down my face, not from pain, but from something deeper. Peace. It didn't erase the years, it didn't bring him back, but it closed the loop. The system that took him, exposed. The men who silenced him, caught the truth. Finally free. And in that quiet moment, as the news played in the background, I whispered aloud, "You did it, Dad." Because he did. He gave everything to protect me. And in the end, he handed me the key, literally, to finish what he started. Justice didn't come in a courtroom speech or a dramatic confrontation. It came in a locked box, in dusty tapes, in a name spoken out loud again and again. Denny Rowe. A man who didn't vanish, a man who sacrificed, a man who won in the end. It was 2 weeks after the arrests were made when I got the message. A soft knock on the door, not the aggressive kind, not the ones that come with subpoenas or signatures, just gentle. I looked through the peephole, cautious by reflex now. It was a woman, late 30s, maybe early 40s, dark hair pulled back, holding a small paper bag. She looked nervous, her shoulders tight, her eyes darting between the hallway and her feet. I didn't recognize her at first, but then she looked up and I remembered Alicia, my cousin Barry's daughter. We hadn't spoken in over 12 years, not since the Thanksgiving before Dad disappeared. Back then, she was the bubbly one, always calling me Corey, always bringing me little gifts, always the peacemaker in a family that didn't know how to hold on to each other, and then silence. After Dad vanished, she cut off contact. No replies, no explanation, not even a card during the holidays. I told myself she was just following her father's lead, maybe even being protected, but her absence had hurt just as much as anyone else's. I opened the door. "Hi," she said, voice soft. "I wasn't sure if you still lived here." I nodded silent. She held out the bag I brought you, lemon shortbread, your favorite. "You used to eat them by the handful when we were kids. I didn't take the bag right away." My hand stayed by my sides. "What do you want, Alicia?" I asked, not unkindly. "Just flat." She looked down, then back at me. Her voice cracked. "I want to apologize." I stepped back. Not to invite her in, but to let her speak. I saw the interview, she said, and the news, and the videos. And her throat caught. "I didn't know, I swear. Karina, I didn't know what my father was involved in." I studied her. The tightness in her jaw, the shame behind her eyes, the way she held herself like she expected me to yell or slam the door. I wanted to believe he was innocent, she continued. "For years, I told myself that your dad probably ran off, that maybe he really was hiding something, but I think I always knew deep down I just didn't want to face what that meant about my own family." She paused. "And about what I did to you or didn't do." The hallway was still. No noise, no neighbors, just her voice and the soft sound of my own heartbeat ticking behind my ribs. "I abandoned you," she whispered. "I didn't even call. I saw what they were saying about you and I stayed quiet. I thought it wasn't my place, but the truth is, I didn't have the courage. And I'm sorry." I looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't the girl from before, the one who made us friendship. Bracelets and told silly jokes. She was older now and haunted by the same kind of ghosts I'd lived with for years. And here's the thing, I didn't feel anger I thought I would. I thought I'd throw her silence back at her, ask where she'd been all those nights. I sat alone begging for someone to believe me, but I didn't need to, because I didn't need anything from her anymore. That was the difference. I had spent years waiting for someone to come and rescue me from that isolation, to say, "You were right, I believe you, am here now," but I'd already rescued myself, so I stepped forward and took the paper bag gently. "Thank you," I said. She blinked, startled. "Really?" I nodded. Would you want to talk sometime?" she asked, hopeful. "I don't expect anything. I just miss you." I thought for a moment. Then I smiled, small but real. Maybe I said one day her shoulders relaxed just a little. And then she turned and walked away. Not rejected, but not embraced either. Just released. I closed the door softly and set the shortbread on the table, and I felt something settle in my chest. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. No dramatic tears, no music swelling in the background, but it was real. It was two women standing in the wreckage of a shared name, quietly acknowledging the mess and deciding not to carry it forward. Later that night, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea, watching the city lights blink through the window. My phone buzzed. A message from the WNCR reporter. "They're running the final piece next week. Full name, full story. You ready?" I stared at the screen, and I typed back, "I've been ready for 13 years. It's strange how life circles back to the smallest things. Not the big revelations, not the courtroom moments or the breaking news clips, but the quiet ones. The smell of morning coffee, the sound of keys on a counter, the way light hits a kitchen window just right at 7:15 a.m. That's what I noticed today, the light. It spilled across my table like it used to back in my father's house, golden, gentle, slow. I stood in my tiny kitchen, the one I once considered just a stopgap, and realized I had outlived the version of myself that moved in here. That woman was tired, ghostly vanishing. But this woman, the one holding a coffee cup with a chipped rim and a quiet heart, was still here. I didn't make pancakes today or burn toast. I just stood with the mug he gave me, the same one where the key had been hidden all those years. It sits now on a shelf above my sink, no longer in rotation. I don't drink from it anymore. I've cleaned it, dried it, and placed it beside the envelope with my name. And the tapes I made copies of, I don't hide them. I display them. They're not evidence anymore. They're part of my history. And history, once faced, loses its power to haunt. Sometimes people still reach out. Strangers who saw the story. Old students. Former co-workers who never knew what to say back then, but finally found the courage. They ask how I feel now, if I'm okay, if I've moved on. And I always answer the same way: I didn't move on, I moved forward. Because you don't outrun something like this. You carry it. You learn how to shift its weight. You stop letting it bend your spine. You stop shrinking under it. You stand. I visit Dad's old gym once a month now. It's no longer a gym. It's being converted into a shelter for at-risk youth. I spoke to the nonprofit running it and told them the history of Locker 212. They promised to keep it intact as a symbol, not of disappearance, but of truth, of bravery, of quiet resistance. A few weeks ago, I got a letter. No name, no return address. Inside was a single note. "He was proud of you. We both were. I don't know who sent it. Maybe it was Kevin, if he's still alive. Maybe it was someone who knew more than they ever said. Or maybe it was Dad and the only way he could still reach me. Either way, I didn't cry, I just smiled. Then I folded the note and placed it inside the mug. A new piece of the story joining the old. The last time I visited his old house, I noticed the tree we planted when I was 8 had grown so tall its branches nearly touched the power lines. It was the same tree he used to tie a tire swing to, the same one I used to lean against while he fixed up the yard in silence. It's still standing, and so am I. Maybe that's the lesson. Not that justice always comes, not that truth will always win, but that sometimes surviving is the justice living well, living without bitterness, choosing peace over pity, choosing yourself over their silence. So this is my last word on the story, at least the part the world sees, But between me and him, the conversation never stopped. Every sunrise is a whisper, every memory a quiet nod. I never got to say goodbye, but I got to say enough. And that was more powerful than I ever imagined. This wasn't just a story about a father who disappeared. It was about a daughter who refused to disappear with him. It was about carrying love through silence and finding your voice when no one else will speak for you. If this story touched you, please give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real powerful stories like this one. Because sometimes the people the world forgets turn out to be the ones who remember everything.